My paranormal experiences has made me realize that not everyone can experience this phenomena. I have a twin sister who has no abilities at all, but I myself have been born able to experience this phenomena, these things, and just realizing that not everybody sees these things. I've seen some crazy things, and I'm willing to share this with you. Well, how do I explain and set this story up? I was born a psychic. I didn't go to psychic school. I've been able to experience things and see things since I was little. My twin sister does not have this ability. She thinks I'm silly that I see things. But I am well known in northern Ohio as a ghost banisher and a pretty good psychic. People call me when they have ghost problems, and I feel that it's my responsibility to come in and help them, with their hauntings. But outside of that, I do enjoy camping and hiking. I do ride horses, often in the woods. And I have a story to tell you about when I was 18 years old. I was in the Rocky River Reservation, which is in northern Ohio. And it's kind of near the airport there. And I was riding my horse, and I had an experience that nobody believes me. But you know what? Maybe it's time to tell the story. So I'd like to tell you the story about the day I was riding my horse. I was 18 years old, in the summer of 1981. 1981 it was. And there's this area down by the river. And then, of course, there's steep embankments there to the next level where they build roads and they build houses. And there's this big riding arena way up high. It's probably 100 foot from the bottom there to the top. So there's this steep trail. And this trail is very steep when you go up or down. And it is absolutely impossible to stay on top of your horse when going up this hill. Now, this summer day in 1981, I was riding my horse bareback. And normally, if you go up a steep hill, you would hang on to the stirrup of the saddle, and the horse would pull you up the hill. You would work together going up the hill. But not this day. I was actually hanging on to the tail of the horse. And the horse was like a mountaineer. I was like hanging onto the horse. The horse was walking up the hill. And it was a near 90-degree angle. It was really steep. And he would stop and go on command. And halfway up this hill, this horse stopped. I mean, it's like hanging on the side of a cliff of a Peruvian mountain. I'm like, go. So I start slapping my horse on the butt. Go, go, I said. Go. And the horse was looking to the left and looking into the brush. Now, they had planted pine trees to hold back the soil. So there was like these rows of pine trees all along that cliff edge there. And my horse was staring. Now, when an animal looks at something, often their ears are pointed at something, and a horse is just like a dog or a cat. It'll point its ears. It's what it's looking at. So the horse had his head down low on this trail with me hanging onto his tail. And he looks over, and I look over, and I hear giggling. And the horse hears giggling. And I look over, and I see it, and it was about maybe 15 inches tall, maybe 1.5 feet tall, not that tall. Of course, taller than a Barbie. But it was a thin little person. It was actually two of them because I saw the arm of the other one. And it was standing on the edge of a tree with its hands over its mouth, giggling because it was watching me go up this hill hanging onto this horse's tail. It had this high-pitched giggle, and then I saw the hand of the other one reach out and grab it by its face, I swear, and it pulled it back behind the tree. And me and my horse saw this, and had not been for my horse stopping and looking, I would have ignored that giggle. I would have thought it was just another bug or a chirping in the woods. It sounded just like a very high-pitched giggle, like somebody on helium, a very high-pitched giggle. this being had the clothing that was tight fitting, so it was a thin being, and the clothing was a grayish, like the bark of the trees, like the pine trees have a darkish gray color, and the clothing had the same color as the trees, almost like a camouflage, but not like our camouflage. It's patterns. It was matching the tree trunks, and it had long, straight hair, and it was more of a sandy gray. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't blonde, but it wasn't black. It wasn't brown. It was more gray, stringy, and it had large eyes like a praying mantis. It had very, very large black eyes, and its chin and its nose and its little mouth and its bottom part of its face was tiny, and it had its little hands. And when he grabbed it and pulled it behind the tree, it like pulled its hands down to catch itself because he was like tipped over. And I saw the face. It was a very tiny human-like face, but it had huge black eyes. And no, it didn't look like a gray alien. It just was, it looked like a little person standing there behind the tree. And I was blown away, like blown away. Now, look, I don't get drunk and ride my horse at 18. I wasn't high on marijuana, riding my horse in the metro parks. I was just riding my horse up this hill to go up to the upper level there under the arena. And I think that these beings were watching the trail. They were like a watcher, and they came across me at the right time. And they started giggling because they've never seen such a sight as a human hanging onto the horse's tail walking up the hill. And I swear that happened. And the emotions in me was like, no one's going to believe me. It's one of my emotions was, no one's going to believe me. Who else has seen this? Was another thought I had was, who else would see this? Or who else has seen this? I'm telling you, it was life-changing at 18. I never believed in any of that until, I saw it. I've heard of these things. I've heard of little people. I've heard of them. I've actually heard a story about some nasty ones that they considered were not nice. I've also heard of ones that actually come and goof around on people's horses and goof around with your pets. They make pets too out of them. I don't know if that's true. I've never heard this before, but I just always thought it was a folklore, or little people were just something made up, or, little elves and things like that, or little fairies. I'm thinking they're going to be tiny. They're going to be little tiny things. Now, this thing was a good 15 inches tall, at least. It was way bigger than a Barbie. It was kind of thin. And I did see that. I did see it. I can't stop seeing it. And I hope to see it again. The next experience I'm going to share with you, there was actually witnesses with me. And I would hope that maybe they could come forward one day and we can make an actual report somewhere. But I'll start by explaining that there is a urban legend in the Gorge area, which is part of the Cuyahoga National Forest there in Ohio. It's near Akron, and they call it the Gorges. And it's part of like some steep valleys and steep areas. And the urban legend is that the gargoyles would lay their eggs in there, or that they would hibernate in there. And that every 75 years they would come out like the locusts or something. They would once every 75 years they would come out, and they would be like tormentors. I don't know. I don't know much about that legend, but that's the bits and pieces that I know. So I am a person who runs these ghost tours in Ohio, and I offer these around Halloween time in October. I would run bus tours or caravan tours around the area and show people all the haunted places. So I often do this reconnaissance work before the tours actually start to make sure there's no washed out roads, and I go and check out and investigate myself. And in the summer of 2010, I believe it was June. Me and my friend, and I'll call her JD. Me and JD were kicking around together in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park there. And we were in an area called Indigo Lake. And Indigo Lake is a natural spring-fed lake that the American Indians near there would often use as a storage locker for their meats in the wintertime, and as a fresh water source in, I believe, in the summertime. Because in the wintertime, it would not completely freeze all the way, and they could put their meats down up under the water where it was really icy cold and keep it refrigerated, I guess. So it also doubled as a burial ground area. The flat areas where the common people were buried, and the hills or the mounds where the important people were buried. Well, the metro parks actually bulldozed a big biking path through the burial field that connects the lake and through the mounds and through all the fields, and disrupted a burial ground there. This is what I believe created this attraction for the gargoyle, or perhaps the gargoyle was summoned there to protect the disturbed remains in some way. This gargoyle is there, and it's been seen by many people. So anyways, I'm there with Miss JD, and we are at the railroad depot there. There's a covered place there where the railroad cars pull up and people get off and on, and it's a platform there. And it's covered, has a roof. And we were inside reading the historical placards, and we hear something fall on the roof. Boom! It just like something heavy fell on the roof, which was odd because there's no trees right next to it. We're right next to we're in an open area. There's no tree branches or nothing. We thought, well, something just, like a bird or something it was on the roof. So we went outside and we looked up, and mind you, broad daylight, there was a gargoyle sitting on the roof of this platform. And this is Indigo Lake, and it's right near this burial ground here. And it looked like the size of a German Shepherd, large German Shepherd, or perhaps the size of a 10-year-old boy. It's the only way I can think of as a size. And it had not jet black skin and not like green skin like a lizard. It had more of a greenish black skin. And the only way I can describe the color is I have a black rooster that has a green shine to his feathers. So it's almost like a metallic green, but yet flat when you looked at it. He didn't shine. It's just the weirdest color. And it was a gargoyle. I didn't even know it had wings until it kind of squatted, and then it pushed off, and then it spread out its wings, and it went flying off, and me and Miss JD puddled. We literally were so terrified that we fell to the ground and like puddled. I don't know how else to describe the emotional reaction we had. We were afraid, and we hit the ground and thought, what if it comes back, And it had the face of a gargoyle. I remember there was a movie back in the day. I can't tell you what year it was, but it was like the gargoyles that came back every so many years. And it looked like those gargoyles, but it didn't have horns. I remember it looking like, I remember the long chin, some hair off the chin. I remember crazy looking face and the ears, and it just was gargoyle-y looking. And it spread its wings and took off. It wasn't an owl. It was not a herring. It wasn't an eagle or a buzzard, I'm sure. It was humongous. And we saw that. We definitely saw that. Okay, now, later on that year, for Halloween time, I had ghost tours. And one of the ghost tours was in the Cuyahoga Valley there. And I specifically remember the date. I'm pretty sure it was December 11th. And I believe it was 2010. And I had a very small van, and Miss JD was on the tour. And I know that a guy named Roger was in there, a couple other people, and then there was a Ryan and a Tammy and a Carol who had the experience with me. They were all on the tour, and we got over to Indigo Lake and parked, and it actually started to snow. And we all went back towards that Indigo Lake area, and I told the story about what me and JD had seen. So Miss Tammy and Miss Carol and Mr. Ryan walked back on the path back towards the area where it goes right to the woods, and they were startled by something. Now, I have to tell you, this was right around sundown, which would have been early, right around probably 5 o'clock-ish. We remember the sun was going down. We knew we had to get out of the park. It was the last stop of the night, and they went back towards like this wooded area. There's no leaves in the tree, and they said that they startled something, and they thought maybe it was a turkey roosted up in the tree, and it spread its wings and glided down to the ground, and then it went into a set of bushes. So they walked over it to see what kind of wildlife it was. They couldn't discern in the dark, like it was a dark shape, but they could not discern what was in the bushes. So they actually went and kicked the bush, and they said, quote unquote, they hopped out of the bush on all fours. They could hear the little nails clicking on the path, because it's a paved path there. And it looked back at them. They said it was a gargoyle. It folded its wings as it ran. They said, yeah, it was like the size of a dog, a big dog, and it ran on all fours. It had wings, and whatever had flown out of the tree into that bush had wings and 4 legs. And it went running off. They said it was, to them in the dark, it looked very dark or black. And they came screaming back to the bus, screaming. I mean, Ryan outran the girls. He ran to the illusion of safety that was the tiny bus we rented. And then I'm like, where's the girls? And he was, oh, I'm sorry. And he ran back towards the girls. And then the girls were still running and huffing. They finally made to the safety of the bus, and they were exclaiming, we saw it, we saw it, we swear we saw it. And I was so proud that they saw it, but I was sad that nobody had a camera ready, you know. But it is something that people have been reporting in that area of the Cuyahoga Valley, and I've seen it once, and now I know that people on my ghost tour also had the same experience. They didn't see it fly. They only saw it drop out of the tree, spread its wings, and hit the ground. But then they approached the bush, and then it ran off on 4 legs. Looking back as it ran, it folded its wings. They said it was terrifying. This gargoyle phenomena, I don't know what to make of it as a paranormal investigator. I believe it has something to do with the Indian burial grounds. I have heard of other stories where burial grounds are dug up, or they maybe, created a road and just bulldozed through everything. And then all of a sudden there's this elemental that's stirred up and is guarding the place or is trying to run off people at the place. And I don't know whether to call it an elemental or not, but it just seems paranormal to me because it's not a known creature. It's not something I've ever seen in my travels. It's not something I've heard talked about in the paranormal community much. And perhaps there is something to this gargoyle legend down in the Cuyahoga Valley. Well, anyways, these experiences of mine, they're so much different than the normal psychic stuff I do, or the spiritual work that I do, or working with people who are dead and don't cross over. I wonder sometimes if there's something to me that's different, and that's why I'm allowed to experience it. And maybe that's why I'm a good banisher, is I'm not afraid of doing this. I'm not afraid of investigating and going to places where allegedly these things are. I'm not afraid to go towards Lake Erie and sit and watch for their Bessie there. Lake Erie has a South Bay Bessie. Sometimes I look for that. I'm not afraid to go looking for Bigfoots or other cryptids. But it always seems that when I do have experiences, it's not when I'm looking. It just seems to happen on these odd chances or times when I wasn't expecting it. And I guess I feel privileged that I do have the sight to, experience these things. And I believe because I have this insight or I have this ability, I believe it is my responsibility to help others who are tormented by anything that would scare them.
My paranormal experiences are kind of varied and vast. They go over several different decades. I was born in eastern Kentucky in a small town called Jackson, and shortly after my birth, we moved to a nearby town called Campton, which is in Wolfe County. My father was not in very good health and spent quite a bit of time in the hospital, and when he would be in the hospital, I would go and stay with my aunt. And I spent quite a bit of time with them in Breathitt County in Jackson. And as things will happen in eastern Kentucky on dark nights when there's nothing on the television or the lights go out, sooner or later it turns to ghost stories. So my aunt tells me this story, and it starts probably about 1980 is when I first heard it, which I would have been about around 12. She tells this story about when she was pregnant with her first son, which would have been about 1952. From what she's told us, she was pregnant when it started, and about the time my cousin was born was when it all kind of stopped. So she said that one night a lady down the street was taking her small dog outside to chain it up, as she always did, and the dog didn't want to go outside. So she tried to corral it and get it outside, and eventually it hid under the bed, and she got down and got it out from under the bed and took it outside and tied it up like she always did. And when she went out to get it the next morning, it was dead. And wasn't just dead, but the head was cut off, and there was very little blood at the site, and most of the head was eaten. And she wasn't the only one. Apparently something came through the town and killed the first night around 6 dogs, leaving them the same way with the heads decapitated and partially eaten and very little blood at the scene. So she's telling me this story, and she goes into great detail, and she talks about the people she knew in the community at the time and how the men would go out at night to hunt this thing, whatever it was, that everyone was terrified and people were afraid to put their dogs outside. And she told one tale of one of her neighbor ladies that another woman called and asked her to come over quick, that Sambo was hurt. And she knew the lady didn't have any kids, and she didn't know who Sambo was. So she goes to the lady's house, and in the front parlor of the house on a couch, she said there was a thing laying there that looked almost exactly like a man, except it was covered with short white fur. And she asked the lady what happened to it, and she said, its mate hurt it. They got in a fight, and its mate hurt it. Well, this, without a doubt, scared and surprised the lady, and she started to leave, and the woman that had called her told her not to tell anybody anything about it. So she left, and of course the first thing she did was to go to the cops. So the cops go to this place, and they were photographers by trade. So when they came to search the house, the lady told them that they could search upstairs, but they couldn't go into the basement because she had all of her film out there, and they would expose the negatives and ruin all the prints. So they gave her time to get everything cleaned up, and when they went and searched the basement, they found nothing. They did notice that there was a new door on the cellar leading outside. So they checked around because neither of the old people were carpenter types, and they found a handyman who had put the new door on the basement to replace a 2-inch thick oak door that had been shattered from the inside out. So the next day, the lady that had been called comes home from work, And they live in an almost like a tenement apartment building that has a bottom floor and a top floor, and there's like 6 apartments on the top and 6 on the bottom. And she's upstairs. She goes into her apartment and sets her purse down on the counter and turns around, and there's a creature standing in the doorway of her bedroom that is the height of the door because its head is bent down looking at her through the door like its arms are above it. And she said it looked like a very gaunt, skinny man, but its face was just indescribable. And of course, she screams and runs out the door. And downstairs, her brother-in-law hears her scream, so he comes out of his door, and she runs over top of him to get into their apartment. And once they calmed her down, she told them what she had seen. So it was at this time that more dogs are still showing up dead, and people are getting really, really scared. And as far as the newspapers went, there was only one article that really told anything about the first night. After that, it was almost completely silent, except for 2 mentions later on, one of which was a letter to the editor from a lady named Mally. And she says, "I sure do worry about my people since I received word about the ferocious animal at large. I believe that if you asked the Army for help, you would get it. You may have to write to Washington, D.C. That seems to me your only solution. Yours truly." Another mention of it was in a section of the paper that was called Rambling Through Willaba. Willaba was a small area of the county about 5 miles away from the main town. And all it had was a general store. And the guy that ran the general store would put a article in the paper every week telling about the comings and goings of the people at the store and what was happening, almost like a Lum and Abner type show, only in writing. And he talked about all the people over in Jackson scared half to death because the booger man was running up on their back porch and chewing their doorknobs off. So the people in the town were all pretty scared. A lot of the men were over in Korea. The ones that were left were mainly all World War II veterans. So they got their guns and their weapons of destruction, and they would go out every night hunting this thing. Of the people that saw it, no one could give a really good description. It would kind of raise up on the riverbanks out from under driftwood, and they would shoot at it, and it would just kind of disappear. They couldn't tell that it had run off. They couldn't hear it screaming. They didn't hear a splash where it went in the river. It just kind of vanished. And nobody ever got a really good look at it except for the lady that had been called. And people tended to, the words of women were not as listened to as well as they are now back in 1952. So as time went on, more and more dogs were killed, and the family that had called her to come over and check on Sambo, their house burned down, and they moved on to Florida. And after that, nothing else was ever heard about it or seen in the town. And there was actually another article in a neighboring county's paper that the Breathitt County Dog Killer had been seen in Menifee County. And there are very few mentions of it in the paper, but the most important mention of it was the first article, in which the title of the article was "Dogs Spend a Fearful Weekend. Killer Eats Head, Sucks Blood." And the newspaper goes on to call it "The Thing, a Werewolf Most Likely." Well, my aunt, of course, told me this story, and me being a precocious 12-year-old, I didn't believe her. I thought it was all made up. She was trying to scare me half to death. But the next day, she and my uncle took me to the newspaper office where their cousin worked, and she let me go back into the morgue, and there was the newspaper article. It took me a while to find it, but sure enough, there it was. So something absolutely did happen. Something killed all the dogs. They believe up to 20 were killed between Jackson and Quicksand, which is another area in the county. And no one ever produced a body. No one ever produced any evidence of what the creature was. But my uncle, who tended to be a little long-winded at times, he was a World War II vet and did love his tall tales. Believe it or not, he actually said that the deputy sheriff had killed it, that everyone knew that he had killed it, that he shot it in the face with a silver bullet. And there was a closed meeting in the basement of the courthouse with 3 or 4 of the county officials, and this thing laid out on a slab, and then it was burned. No proof or evidence of this, but it did disappear, as well as the family. They moved to Florida. So, I carried this story around with me for many years, and it got me thinking about how some things are a little bit strange out there. And, I would always hear different ghost stories and tales that people would tell, and swear to God it was true. So, about 1987, as I was just graduated from high school and was in college at Lexington, the so-called satanic panic hit eastern Kentucky. And what actually happened, this really did happen, 3 folks, I believe it was, in Breathitt County in Jackson, dug up a dead body and used it to perform some satanic ceremonies, and all heck broke loose, literally. After that, according to a newspaper article I read one time back then, it said that this panic had run through 26 eastern Kentucky counties, that there were wild packs of Satanists roaming the wilderness that were looking for blonde-haired, blue-eyed children to sacrifice. And as it should happen, my friends and I got pulled into it. My friend had a huge, 70-acre farm, and it had 2 ponds on it. And we were always at his place camping and fishing and hunting and doing all that stuff. And as a result, we weren't in town getting in trouble like all the other young folks, so we automatically had to be up to something. So we got dragged into this satanic panic business, and supposedly 2 of my friends and I threw a dead pig off of a Spradlin Bridge onto a car that was passing underneath. But if anybody checks, Spradlin Bridge doesn't have a road under it. It only has a creek. So it was just pure panic in the community. And, I'd go into town and people would stop talking and move away and stuff. And word kind of got back to us that all this was going on. I mean, it followed me to my part-time job in Jackson, 20 miles away. My boss came up to me and asked me if I was involved in it. And, he knew my aunts and uncles and stuff. And I just looked at him and I said, the raising I've had, do you actually think I would be out digging up graves and doing foolishness like that? And he said, no, but word got back to me and I wanted to ask you about it. And I said, no. So this kind of made me mad. So I went and met with my friends, and we decided that it was time to go on the offensive, that if there was some kind of shenanigans like that going on, we needed to go find out about it and put a stop to it. So we all piled into my truck, me and my good friend Omer in the front, and the rest of the gang in the back with baseball bats and assorted implements, and we went out to find these fellas that were terrorizing the county. So we were driving through an area of the town called the Calaboose, following this van. Supposedly the Satanists were driving around in a white van, and we followed these guys a big, long road, good hour or so. And every now and then they would stop and open the side door and then close the side door and then keep going. And there's only one way out once you go into the Calaboose. So as we came out, the police had a roadblock. And the sheriff at the time, Gary Dunn, he comes up to my truck. We're in front. We got in front of him somehow. And he comes up and, what are you boys doing? And I just looked at him and I said, Gary, I'll tell you what, me and my friends here have been brought into this satanic business and we don't appreciate it none. So we came out here looking for the people that started it all. And I said, what brings you out here? And he said the same thing, calls about black hoods. And I said, well, they're in that van right there behind us. Go ask them what they're doing out here. So he let us go on and went back and talked to the people at the van. But it was at this point that I decided that maybe it would be better, instead of sitting back and kind of watching all this stuff, to go on the offensive. So we started a little group. A fellow I knew was being spiritually harassed And since I had been doing all this research and studying since my aunt told me this story, I kind of, knew the territory. So we kind of helped them through their problem. And it was around this time, probably about 1988, that my friend Omer and I were driving on Baptist Road, which is a gravel road in Wolfe County that goes, 10, 15 miles maybe. Lots of houses and trailers and stuff like that. But we're driving down Baptist Road and talking about this, that, and the other. And we come over a little rise and we look I saw it to the side, and Omer saw it because at the same time as we went by it, we both kind of looked at each other and said, "Did you see that?" And on the side of the road was a small creature sitting cross-legged with its arms folded in front of it. And this would have been maybe 2 to 3 feet tall if it was standing up. And it looked like a fox, but it looked more like an anthropomorphic fox, almost like if you took Walt Disney's Robin Hood and shrank it down. And it was just sitting there looking at us. And there had been stories of the so-called Baptist Booger forever, but something that's very familiar in Eastern Kentucky is parents will use fear to motivate their children. Many as the time my aunt would stop me from doing something I wasn't supposed to do because here comes the devil with a red hot chain, get out of that room. So we always thought it was just parents, were trying to keep their kids in line, but we actually saw this little creature. Now at the same time was when the one guy was having the spiritual trouble, the harassment. We were just coming off the tail end of the satanic panic disaster, and we couldn't quite figure out why we saw it, and we couldn't figure out what it was. We gave some speculation that maybe it was a message, some type of a thing telling us we were on the right path, or that it was some sort of wood spirit. But, the Native Americans in that area, they told tales of little people, pukwudgies, and small elf-like creatures that roam throughout the woods. So he is Native American, half, and we kind of just debated on it for a while, what was going on. And we kind of went our separate ways. We just had separate lives. He got married, I got married. We didn't stop being friends, but we didn't see each other as often. And about 1990, I decided that we should actually organize. And so we started what was, to my knowledge, the first paranormal research group in Eastern Kentucky. I would say in Kentucky, but the Louisville Ghost Hunter Society might have had us beat on that. But we were definitely the first in the eastern part of the state. And we would go out and investigate different hauntings that people had. They'd call us and we'd go check them out. And a lot of times we could give them a reason why they were seeing something, as just a shadow or the way the paint was on the wall, or why they were hearing something, a leaky pipe in the basement. From time to time, we would run into something that was unexplainable and kind of scary. And we have some photographs and stuff like that. We've actually got a really good recording on a cassette tape of this one house we checked out on the back end of the calaboose where I mentioned earlier. The place was supposed to be haunted, and we decided to go check it out. And of course, there were all these satanic symbols and markings in there. And on the floor, there was a huge pentagram. I mean, it had to have been about 5 feet wide in this old house. And whenever you would put we were poor ghost hunters. We didn't have EMF readers and all that. We had to take the Harry Price route and use workable but archaic means. So when you would put a compass in the center of this pentagram, it would go off true north. And we couldn't quite figure it out. So we took a lot of pictures, and we got some strange photographs in the house. But the pictures that didn't come out, not even the negatives, I mean, the negatives were blank, was when we would take pictures of this pentagram to document the compass being off true north. And we would always take 2 or 3 pictures of stuff we wanted to get in case, the first one didn't come out right. Maybe the second one would. It's hard to tell when you're using film cameras. And we probably took 3 or 4 pictures of this pentagram with the compass, and none of them came out, not a one. We set a tape recorder down and left the house. Actually went out into the field and sat there for half hour, 45 minutes, and then went back and got the tape recorder. And when we got it home, we listened to it, and you can hear my boots walking through the house because I had forgotten to take a second round of pictures with a new roll of film. So you can hear my boots clomping through the house. And as soon as they leave the house, the sound starts. And it's almost like a whooshing noise, like someone's spinning something around their head, like a vortex type sound. And it goes on for a good minute or so. And then it slowly peters out. There's some interesting photographs from that. There's a trail of light that crosses a negative. A lot of times when you take pictures and there's an anomaly, the anomaly will cross the negative and leave a scratch on the centerpiece. But this one jumped from negative to negative. You've got the full length of the spiral of light, and then the next picture has just a little bit of a tail end. And if you put them side to side, they match up. So we got a little bit of evidence for our work, but it was getting a little tight because we weren't plumbers. We weren't making $20 an hour, and film is pretty expensive. So it was completely funded by myself and my friends, and it just got pretty pricey, to take 100 photographs, to have it all developed, to buy the film, to buy the tapes, buy the gas to go to these things and stuff. And we weren't having any kind of a turnaround as far as funding. So things kind of slowed down a little bit. It was when the writer of the group and myself decided to go to the University of Kentucky and check out the newspaper archives, because we were still looking for information about the Breathitt County Dog Killer. So we drove up to Lexington, to UK, and went to the library, and they've got extensive archives. And that's where we found a lot of the stories that we didn't find in the initial search in Breathitt County, because all we had there was hard copy old newspapers. Once we got into the microfilm, we could check the papers from all the surrounding counties, and that's where we found that it had been seen in Menifee County. And we started expanding the search out around the same time frame. So we were looking in the Lexington Herald, and there was a story from Madisonville, which is just barely north of Hopkinsville, which you may have heard of from the infamous Kelly Hopkinsville goblin case that happened somewhere around the same time, I think, in the early 50s, late 40s. It was in the Daily Madisonville Messenger. It talked about the Madisonville Varmint. So, of course, we go to Madisonville's paper and start looking. Now, the story of the varmint was this creature that was seen. The first report of it in the paper is on December 28, 1951. There are 34 counts of it. It was almost a daily news report in the paper, in the Madisonville Messenger. We got December 31st, January the 2nd, 5th, 7th, 8th, 10th, 12th, 14th, 16th, 19th, 22nd, 24th, 25th, 26th, 29th, all through February until the article hits in the Lexington Herald. When it gets into the big city paper, everything stops. So apparently this creature, which was said to be dog-shaped but much larger than a Great Dane, was rambling through the countryside eating pigs. A 60-pound pig was eaten, almost half devoured, and it was going around just killing this livestock. So once again, the townsfolk would organize and go out hunting this creature, and they would go out in large groups and hunt for up to 24 hours at a time. and they would talk about their hits and misses with it, if they got it close. One fellow chased it didn't chase it, but tracked it into a cave where he knew it was at, and covered the front of the cave, and then went up on the top where an entrance hole was and put a 50-pound rock over the top. He went to get help and came back, and the rock on the top had been moved, and claw marks were visible on the rock where it had pushed itself out. These hunts went on for months, and I mean, like I say, they were almost daily events. 200 or 300 people would meet up on a weekend and go out and search for this thing. But it was very big news for a very long time, and then it all just stopped. Like, no conclusion. Nobody said what happened. Nobody reported it being killed. It was just very, very strange. And as an interesting side note, there was a television show out a few years ago called Mountain Monsters, and the first episode of the first season was the Wolf County Wolfman. That's my hometown of Campton. The place where we saw the Baptist Booger was on the eastern side of the diamond where the Mountain Monsters crew was hunting for the Wolf County Wolfman. Now, of course, I heard about this show and that it was happening, so I went to see my friend Omer, and we discussed the whole situation that, he's lived there all his life, and I lived there for 35 years, and neither one of us had ever heard of the Wolf County Wolfman. So we thought that there was some kind of shenanigans, but then his son had said something, that somebody had said something about it, and we felt like it was just the Baptist Booger thing all over again, that a new generation had come along. And since the high school mascot is a wolf, and the guy dresses like a big furry wolf in the basketball teams and stuff, that the parents had come up with the Wolf County Wolfman to scare their kids. And it's all right there in that same area. And then in Madisonville, you've got the Varmint that happened in the early 50s, right about the same time as the Kelly Goblins, which is just south of Madisonville. At the same time, in eastern Kentucky, you have Breathitt County Dog Killer that's killing all these dogs all over the county. And, there was talk of person that they had found a human body with an arm missing, but they felt like it had been a hobo that had fallen off of a train that was going through, because there were a lot of trains back then in eastern Kentucky. But we collected all this data and all this information. We had quite a few adventures and collated it all, and it's sitting in a filing cabinet in my garage. So I just thought that since Vic came out and wanted to hear about paranormal occurrences, that I could share a few with him and with you. And that's about all I've got.
If you've had a paranormal experience and would like to be a guest on the show, please contact us by going to myparax.com. That's myparaex.com. Thanks for listening.